This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's make a start. Welcome everyone to the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. Those of you, I think there can be many who aren't familiar with the Institute, but if you haven't been here before, do keep up with what we do. We have this very full program of events throughout the year. Thank you all very much for coming, and thanks to the Higher Education Academy for sponsoring this event. We're very grateful to you. Thanks very much indeed to Dr. Chandramohan for organising, not just this event, but for the really pioneering research in the area of language policy in the Commonwealth. It's a subject that often people don't really think very much about, but it's an increasingly important one, and it chimes very well with the theme of connecting cultures, as Chandra said. We're incredibly lucky here at the Institute to have a number of very distinguished senior research fellows who work very hard for us in organising things like this. So thank you very much, Chandra, for doing this. It's a really interesting programme. Particularly pleased, I think, to see the Mediterranean represented. It's a neglected aspect of Commonwealth affairs. Often people forget that there are kind of European members of the Commonwealth. Very good to be reminded of that. And nice also to see this film at the end from the Commonwealth Fund for Technical Cooperation. I have a bit of a vested interest in that we just got an AHRC studentship, doctoral studentship here for 3 years to work on the CFTC, on the history of the CFTC, which again is a kind of neglected, I think, in the scholarly literature, neglected aspect of what the Commonwealth does. Let me just say something about the final event on this programme, which is the Peter Lyne Memorial Lecture. It's the second of our annual Peter Lyne Memorial Lectures. Peter Lyne would be known by many of you. He was a distinguished member of the Institute. He was academic secretary for many years, and I think for many people outside the Institute, Peter Lyne was the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. So we set this lecture up in his memory, and we're delighted to have this evening William Roger Louis, who's really one of the best known and most distinguished historians of Empire and Commonwealth. And Roger will be talking about the so-called migrated archives, the Hounslow Park files, which were spirited out of their countries of origin on independence and stored secretly by the British government until last year, when their existence was revealed. And Roger's going to talk about the relevance of these files to the British Documents and End of Empire project, which this institute ran for 25 years. And I think he's going to think about how it might form the basis for some future research projects. So I think it will be a really fascinating evening, and I hope as many of you as possible can make it. Anyway, thank you all very much. Thanks to Chandra, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip, for the introduction. I think there are a few things which I would like to mention about the program, but also before that, mainly to highlight the idea of connecting cultures, internationalization, and Commonwealth, quote unquote, or in brackets, foreign languages. The the main theme behind this is to link these three things. In other words, how the idea of connecting cultures, intercultural understanding, intercultural relations, and how this particular area, which is very often studied on its own as a separate area, intercultural studies is a whole area of that. And then you have the other area called internationalization, which is very important in many higher education institutions because they see internationalization as a very important aspect. Often internationalization is equated to a number of students coming from another country. But the idea of putting these three things together is to see how this particular idea of internationalization could be seen in a more broad-based way, which is sometimes done, but not always given the same importance as recruitment of students. So say, for example, there's a talk about internationalization of the institutional ethos, internationalization of the curriculum, so that students who may stay in the same country but are able to understand, appreciate internationalization as a key area. So the idea was that we should look at how internationalization is being done, how the higher education institutions are using the notion of internationalizations to create global campuses and global approaches to their programs. And the third area is looking at Commonwealth languages. The idea of Commonwealth languages is again associated with internationalization. Very often, internationalization is seen as happening through English. In other words, if an Italian university decides to change their programs or offer their degrees through English medium, then it is seen as being internationalized. And the same with the Dutch university or another university. So in other words, the language of internationalization is often seen to be English, which is demonstrated by the number of universities, number of countries switching to English as the medium of instruction, which has commercial value and so on. But the idea of internationalization could also be seen in a much localized way, in a much regional context, and therefore you would see that there are languages which cut across political borders, cut across countries, and therefore there is probably a scope for thinking of internationalization, looking at the dynamics, researching on those particular dynamics. Say, for example, if you can use Swahili, for example, you can teach in more than one country in East Africa. So you could, in the same way, say something about Hindi or Urdu, for example, which cut across borders in India and Pakistan. Or if you take Tamil, for example, it's again seen in some of the in more than one country. So the idea of looking at diaspora, in other words, the languages that are used in the diaspora, and how they can be used as a way of internationalization, as a recognition of the fact that forms of language, including Creole, could be a way of internationalizing the ethos of an institution or an ethos of a program or even a particular relationship between different regions of the Commonwealth. So we have one speaker here today who's going to look at the language called Bhojpuri, which is a dialect of Hindi, spoken in Bihar province of India. But many of the indentured labor who went to work in Caribbean were from this part of the country. So therefore you have language transported along with the people to places like Trinidad and other Caribbean countries. Now, the idea is to look at how internationalization works through diasporic language. In other words, can the interest or revival of interest in particular languages of origin of the people can be used as a form of internationalization? So can there be different forms of internationalization, and how can we look at the literature, how can we research into this to recognize this phenomenon and then see how it can be sort of integrated with other forms of internationalization. So we have one speaker who is focusing on that. But related to this again, we're going to look at how languages can form as a basis for internationalization within course, but certainly across cultures. In the case of Sri Lanka, for example, one of our speakers is going to talk about how that particular thing can happen, which can then through music, through the lyrics, through the language that is used, through the linguistic borrowing that's happening, can actually lead to connecting cultures, but also at a form of internationalization. A third strand, probably the final strand of this, is to look at what the role of the media and how media plays in this, particularly with all the digital communication these days. Media is programs produced in one language in one part of the world are shown elsewhere, and it becomes much more common. And what is the role of media in languages, in Commonwealth languages, and how it affects the relationship between regions, countries, peoples, not only between peoples but all of different countries, but also people within the same country. So that's an area which we're going to look at. And then we have a speaker about the process of internationalization as University of London sees it. And London has one of the most extensive and well-established program delivering courses to thousands of people outside the UK, historically as well as recently and currently. And so we're going to have a speaker who's going to look at what internationalization means in terms of academic degrees, universities, and so on. And then followed by this, we have a film, which is, so we have a film which looks at international work of the Commonwealth Foreign Technical Cooperation. And it's a nice video, I should say. I watched it. It's one of the ones I thought was a better produced one. And then we also have a speaker from the Commonwealth Foundation who's going to talk to us about connecting people and how this particular Commonwealth organization, which focuses on people-to-people connections, is taking the idea of Commonwealth theme of connecting cultures seriously. They have specific programs, and he's going to talk about it. And then we have a panel discussion to bring three strands together, and then a nice coffee break, and then we have a very interesting memorial lecture after that. So this is briefly the program. So just a few housekeeping things. If you want to use the toilets, it's just if you go out of this room, through the double doors again, to the left, there is there are toilets for use. And then there's no fire drill as such today. So any sound you hear is for the real. So we'll make we'll take necessary steps. So I think if there are any things, please do ask. And we have the next speaker who is from the Higher Education Academy. And Phil is from the Higher Education Academy, and we have he's going to talk to us about the support Higher Education Academy is providing for the study of languages. And when Phil agreed to support us, I was very pleased. And then we've been working on this particular theme, and I think Phil will explain more about Higher Education Academy and its support for this particular area. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, just very briefly, I wanted to run through the ways that the HEA is supporting the sector, particularly in terms of languages. But first and foremost, I'd like to say very many thanks to Bala for organising today's event. Very grateful that you did so, and the HEA is delighted to be supporting today's event. In terms of future events that you may be interested in, at the beginning of July we have the HEA annual conference taking place at the University of Manchester. On the 9th of July, an event at the University of York looking at international alumni and how they can support languages and internationalisation of HEIs. And then towards the end of July, an event at the University of Leeds looking at the role of corpora in languages for special purposes. In terms of engaging with the student body, we have recently published details of a student-led scheme for student-led projects. This is to encourage students to develop their teamwork, leadership and management skills. Students will be required to work in teams of at least 3, and up to £100 is available for these projects. And the deadline for this is the 2nd of July. If you'd like some more details, if you'd like to discuss this, please come and have a chat over coffee a bit later. And then later this year, we'll be publishing details of a student business plan competition that we're working on in conjunction with the NUS. And this will form part of a strategic initiative in languages, interculturalism and student mobility. More on that a little later in the year. Funding opportunities. There are a number of funding opportunities with the HEA. There's the teaching development grants. Details of all of the funding opportunities are on the HEA website. The TDGs, there are three rounds to that. There's an individual round, a departmental round, and a collaborative round. The collaborative round, up to £60,000 is available. And by collaboration, we mean intra-institutional collaboration or collaboration with an outside body, such as a business or another HEI. We have the UK Travel Fund to facilitate attendance at teaching and learning events, such as the one today. We have strategic grants to improve attainment of BME students. And just yesterday, details of the 2012-13 workshop and seminar series were published. And that's a themed call looking at the themes of employability and flexible learning. And as I mentioned before, for student-led projects that develop employability skills, all of the information on these schemes is available from the HEA website. Just briefly, the case studies, the first point on the slide. I'm collecting case studies of innovative teaching and learning practice for publication in the HEA Languages Bulletin, the newsletter. If you're aware of or engaged in particularly innovative or engaging modules at your HEI, or if you're aware of them, please get in touch. I'd be delighted to showcase them in the bulletin. So that's the HEA website, heacademy.ac.uk. You can sign up for the bulletin by going to My Academy in the top right-hand corner there. You can see the link. That's my email address, and I've recently joined Twitter, so if you want to follow me, you're more than welcome. Just a point to make about the registration form that's on the registration desk just outside. It asks you to whether you agree to or decline the data protection statement. This has to do with whether you allow us to add you to our data mailing list for emails, and also whether you'd be happy for us to inform your HEI that you attended today's event. If you're happy for us to do so, then just write accept next to your name on that form. I think that's it from me, but if you have any questions about the HEA or any other teaching and learning matters, do feel free to come have a chat. And otherwise, thanks again to Bala, and I look forward to getting to know you a bit during the course of today. Thanks, Bala.